The sky had been threatening rain all afternoon, the kind of thick, heavy clouds that hung low over the city, turning every building a shade darker. By the time I stepped out of the office, the first drops had already begun to fall, slow, deliberate taps against the pavement, like the sky was testing its own patience before deciding to pour. Within minutes, it became a steady downpour. Cars hissed along the wet streets, umbrellas bloomed like flowers above hurried pedestrians, and the scent of rain rose from the asphalt in that familiar, comforting way. I pulled my jacket tighter and scanned the street for shelter. That's when I spotted the small tea cafe. It was tucked into the corner of a narrow street, its windows fogged at the edges and glowing with a warm, amber light. The painted sign above the door read the amber leaf, the letters slightly faded, but charming in their imperfection. I ducked inside, shaking the rain from my hair and breathing in the rich aroma of freshly brewed tea that instantly wrapped around me like a blanket. The cafe was cozy in a way that felt almost deliberate. Soft wooden chairs, shelves lined with jars of loose leaf tea, and low-hanging lamps that cast a golden hue over everything. A few patrons sat scattered at tables, quietly sipping their drinks or reading. And then I saw her. She was sitting by the window, her chin resting lightly on her hand as she gazed out at the rain. A cup of tea sat in front of her, steam curling upward in lazy spirals. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, the color catching the warm light from above. There was something about her stillness, how completely present she seemed in that moment, that drew me in before I could even think. I stood there for a second too long, pretending to scan the menu but really stealing glances at her. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just watching raindrops race each other down the glass, but there was a quiet beauty in the way she seemed untouched by the rush of the world outside. I ordered a cup of spiced chai, my voice lower than usual, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the calm of the room. The barista handed it to me in a simple ceramic cup, and I made my way to a table a few spots away from hers. From there, I could see her more clearly. Every so often, she would take a slow sip of her tea, her eyes drifting back to the rain, as if the storm outside was telling her secrets no one else could hear. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she waiting for someone, passing time before the rain let up? Or did she, like me, find a strange comfort in letting the world outside slow down while you sat in warmth, listening to the storm? Our eyes met once, just for a moment. A small, polite smile crossed her face, and I felt an unexpected warmth spread through me, one that had nothing to do with the tea in my hands. I didn't approach her. Not yet. There was something about the scene that felt too fragile to disturb. Like a photograph. You didn't dare move in case it lost its magic. So I sat there, sipping my tea, watching the rain blur the edges of the city, and stealing glances at the girl by the window. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the rain, the tea, and the stranger who seemed to belong to both, was the beginning of something I would carry with me for a long time. The rain had settled into that steady, unhurried rhythm that makes you feel like the whole city is breathing slower. Outside the cafe's windows, the streets gleamed under the soft glow of street lamps, each puddle catching a piece of the light. Inside, everything felt suspended, warmth pressed against the chill, quiet against the rush. She was there again. This time, she wasn't by the window but at a small table in the corner, half hidden behind a potted plant. Her cup of tea sat in front of her, the steam curling upward like faint ghosts of warmth. She had the same calm air about her, as though nothing outside those walls could touch her. I noticed the way her gaze lingered on the rain. She didn't just glance at it, she studied it, as though it were an old friend she was meeting again. After years apart, every now and then, her lips curved slightly, not into a laugh, but into something softer. The kind of smile people give when they're quietly content. I hadn't expected her to look up, but she did. Our eyes met, and for the briefest moment, it was as though the rain had hushed just for us. There was no dramatic pause, no flicker of recognition, just a small, warm curve of her lips that felt oddly personal, like it had been meant only for me. It was nothing more than a polite gesture, but something about it hit differently. I felt the warmth of it before I even realized I was smiling back. I could have left right then, tea or no tea, but instead, I found myself stepping up to the counter and ordering a cup of jasmine tea, even though chai was my usual choice. Maybe I wanted to stay longer. Maybe I just wanted to know if that smile would happen again. When I sat down, I made sure to pick a table that had her in view without being obvious. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept drifting over. She had a book with her this time, the cover worn, pages fanning slightly as she turned them. Every so often, she would pause mid-page and glance back at the rain, as though the story outside the window was just as captivating as the one in her hands. My tea cooled as I watched her, not in a way that felt like spying, but in the way you watch something beautiful because you're afraid it might change if you look away. At one point, she caught me. Her eyes lifted from the page, met mine, and there it was again, that small, warm smile. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was simply there, and it carried something with it that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. I wondered if she recognized me from before, from that first day I'd walked in to escape the rain. Or maybe I was just another stranger who happened to be in her line of sight. Either way, something about that exchange made the room feel smaller, like the space between us had shifted, even if only slightly. The rain outside grew heavier, and I stayed. I told myself it was because I wanted to finish my tea, but really, it was because leaving felt like walking away from something I wasn't ready to lose. Not yet. By the time she stood to leave, my tea was long gone. She placed her book in her bag, slipped into her coat, and walked past me without a word. But as she passed, she glanced at me once more and gave that same gentle smile. And just like that, I knew I'd be coming back. The rain had been falling since morning, weaving its rhythm into the city's pulse. By the time I stepped into the amber leaf that afternoon, it was a full chorus outside, steady, unrelenting, yet somehow soothing. The cafe's windows were fogged over, and the smell of brewed tea greeted me like an old friend. But the place was unusually full. Every table was taken except one. She was sitting there, at a small table by the window, a teacup cradled between her hands. A book lay open in front of her, though it looked like she hadn't turned a page in a while. Her eyes occasionally wandered to the rain outside, following the trails of water as they meandered down the glass. For a moment, I hesitated. I could have taken my tea to go, walked back into the wet streets, pretended I didn't see the empty seat beside her. But something in me didn't want to miss this chance. I stepped closer, feeling the weight of the decision in my chest. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice calm but my pulse quickening. She looked up at me. Recognition flickered across her face. Maybe she remembered the small smiles we'd exchanged on other rainy afternoons. After a heartbeat, she gave a small nod, and I sat down across from her. Up close, I noticed the details I'd missed before. The faint freckles across her nose, the way her hair curled slightly at the ends from the dampness in the air, the gentle steadiness in her gaze. "Crowded today," I said, trying to bridge the gap between strangers. "Rain does that," she replied, her voice soft but clear. It was the kind of voice you leaned into, not because it was hard to hear, but because it carried a quiet warmth that drew you closer. We spoke about simple things at first: the weather, how the city seemed to slow down when it rained, the way tea tasted better when there was a storm outside. Then, without realizing it, the conversation deepened. She told me she came here often, especially when it rained. "It feels safe," she said, glancing toward the window. "Like the world can't get to you in here." I nodded, understanding more than I could explain. "It's like the rain builds a wall outside," I said. "Everything else feels far away." Her laughter came then, soft, almost hesitant, but it carried warmth that reached me instantly. I found myself wanting to hear it again. We talked about books, and I learned she had a habit of rereading her favorites whenever life felt uncertain. We talked about tea, and she confessed she could never stick to just one flavor, always trying something new. And when she asked what I usually ordered, I caught myself smiling as I admitted I'd started drinking jasmine tea because of her. The rain outside seemed to shift, slowing just enough to let the sound of our voices fill the space between us. It wasn't the kind of conversation you rush through. It moved at its own pace, unhurried, like the rain tracing patterns on the window. By the time the crowd in the cafe began to thin, I realized I'd been leaning forward without thinking, drawn in by the ease of talking to her. I hadn't checked my phone once. I hadn't thought about the time. When the barista began clearing nearby tables, she glanced at the window and smiled. "Looks like the rain's letting up." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not in a hurry." She held my gaze for a moment, then looked down at her empty cup, tracing the rim with her fingertip. "Me neither," she said softly, and in that shared table, in that small corner of the world, I felt something shifting, quiet, certain, like the rain had slowed down just for us. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle outside, but we stayed in the cafe as if neither of us was ready to let the moment end. The hum of quiet conversation surrounded us, the kind that made the clinking of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine feel like part of a song. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her cup as if it were an anchor. The tiny gold pendant around her neck, a small, delicate shape I couldn't quite make out, glimmered whenever she leaned forward, catching the light in brief flashes. Each time it did, I found my eyes drawn there before quickly returning to her face. We started talking about books again. She told me her favorites, the ones that had stayed with her for years. I like stories that feel like memories, she said, her voice thoughtful. Not too perfect, not too polished, just honest. I smiled at that. So, the kind that hurt a little? Her lips curved into a knowing smile. Exactly. From books, we moved to travel. She spoke about places she wanted to visit, quiet towns by the sea, small mountain villages where time seemed slower. I told her about a trip I'd taken years ago, where I'd gotten lost in a foreign city and ended up finding my favorite meal by accident. She laughed at the story, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and the sound of it seemed to weave itself into the air between us. Every time she laughed, the pendant caught the light again, like a subtle signal. I was learning to read. The conversation drifted, meandering the way conversations do when there's no clock to answer to. We spoke about the beauty of simple moments, the way tea tastes different depending on the weather, the comfort of a familiar calf, the magic of rain when you're safe and warm inside. A tea. One point, she leaned back in her chair, tilting her head slightly. Do you ever feel like we rush through life too much? She asked. All the time, I admitted. Sometimes I think we only remember the big things because we forget to slow down for the small ones. Her gaze softened, and she nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. The rain outside began to fade into a fine mist, but neither of us made a move to leave. I realized then that it wasn't just the tea keeping me here. There was a warmth in her presence that went deeper than the heat of the cup in my hands. It was in the way she listened, really listened, as if every word mattered. It was in the way her laughter seemed to settle somewhere inside me, making the space there feel brighter. I found myself studying the details of her, the way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the table when she was about to speak, the way her pendant rested just above her heart as if it was keeping its own quiet rhythm. The longer we sat there, the more I realized how rare it was to feel this. Unhurried, even in the city, even in a crowded cafe, it felt like the world had folded itself around this table, leaving just the two of us inside. Eventually, she glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go, she said, though her tone didn't sound eager to. I nodded, but before she could stand, I said, same time tomorrow? She smiled, slow, certain. I'd like that. And as she walked out into the mist, her gold pendant catching one last glint of light, I knew it wasn't just the rain or the tea drawing me back to this place. It was her. It was the kind of rain that didn't just fall, it poured with intention, drumming against the glass like a steady heartbeat. Outside, the streets had turned slick and dark, reflecting the amber glow of the lamps. People hurried past under umbrellas, their faces hidden, their steps quick. But inside the amber leaf, the world felt untouched. We'd been sitting there for hours without realizing it. The tea in our cups had long since cooled, but neither of us moved to refill them. The space between us was filled with the kind of conversation that flowed easily, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. We had wandered from stories of childhood to dreams of the future, circling back to little observations about the rain, the calf, the people who came and went around us. Every now and then, I would catch her smiling, not the polite smile from our first encounters, but something deeper. It had a softness that reached her eyes, one that made the storm outside feel like nothing more than a distant lullaby. I found myself leaning in, not just to hear her better, but because her presence drew me closer without my even realizing it. Her voice was calm, like the sound of water over smooth stones, and I noticed how it made everything else fade into the background. The rain painted the windows in silver streaks, catching the light and blurring the view of the street beyond. It was as if the storm had wrapped the calf in a cocoon, keeping us warm and dry, tucked away from the world. I glanced toward the door and saw that fewer people were coming in now. The rush of the afternoon had passed, leaving a quiet hum of background chatter. The barista moved slowly behind the counter, the scent of brewing tea and freshly baked pastries lingering in the air. She caught me looking at the rain again and tilted her head. What are you thinking about? I hesitated for a moment, then said, how strange it is that a storm can make everything feel calmer. Her lips curved into that warm, familiar smile. Maybe it's because the rain makes you stop. You can't rush through it, you have to slow down, even if just for a little while. I thought about that. She was right. The rain forced people to pause, to wait, to stay in moments they might have otherwise hurried past. Maybe that's why I was here now, because the rain had slowed my steps enough to notice her in the first place. We kept talking, our words weaving around the steady rhythm of the storm. Time became slippery. I didn't check my watch. I didn't think about what I was supposed to be doing. All I knew was that I didn't want this evening to end at one point. She really laughed at something I'd said, her hand brushing lightly against mine on the table. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a quiet spark through me. I looked at her then, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if she felt it too. The rain outside began to soften, its once steady drumming fading into a gentler patter. But even as the storm eased, I didn't feel that pull to leave. The calm I felt wasn't just from the tea or the shelter, it was from her. She looked at the clock on the wall and sighed. "It's getting late." I nodded, but I wasn't ready. "Maybe we could stay a little longer, just until the rain stops." Her smile returned, soft and knowing. "I think I'd like that." And so we stayed, the silver streaks on the windows slowly fading as the storm gave way to quiet streets, holding on to the kind of calm you don't find often enough in this world. By the time the rain finally stopped, the cafe felt quieter than it had all day. The silver streaks on the windows had dried to faint trails, and the world outside was bathed in that fresh, washed clean glow that only comes after a storm. The air felt lighter, but inside me, there was a strange heaviness, not unpleasant, but something that made me want to linger a little longer. We had been sitting together for hours, and yet it didn't feel like enough. Our cups sat empty on the table, but neither of us had moved to refill them in a while. There was no rush in our conversation now. It had slowed to a comfortable rhythm, the kind that didn't need to fill every second with words. Sometimes we'd just sit quietly, listening to the last drops of rain sliding from the roof outside. Eventually, she glanced toward the window. "Looks like it stopped," she said softly, as if she wasn't sure whether that was good or bad. I followed her gaze. The street beyond was glistening in the lamplight, puddles reflecting fragments of the buildings. People were beginning to step outside again, their umbrellas now closed, their footsteps slower. It was the signal that our little cocoon of time was ending. She began to gather her things, sliding her book into her bag, wrapping her scarf loosely around her neck. I felt my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I stood too, pushing my chair back a little too slowly, reluctant to let the moment slip away. We both reached for our coats at the same time, and for a brief second, our hands brushed. It was nothing dramatic, just skin against skin, but it was enough to make me want to stop and say something, anything to keep her there. "So," I began, my voice lower than usual, "maybe we could meet here again sometime?" I didn't want to sound too eager, but I also didn't want her to think this had been nothing more than a shared table on a rainy afternoon. The words felt heavy in my mouth, weighted with hope. She looked at me then, and there it was, that same warm smile I'd noticed the first time we ever locked eyes across the cafe. It was softer now, more certain. "I'd like that," she said simply. It was such a small sentence, but it settled something inside me. I felt the tension in my chest ease, replaced by something lighter, something that felt dangerously close to joy. We stepped outside together. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wet pavement and fresh leaves. The street was alive with the quiet after-rain energy, shop signs glowing, water dripping from rooftops, the sound of cars splashing gently through puddles. For a moment, we just stood there, side by side, looking at the street as if we were both trying to hold on to the last piece of the afternoon. "I guess this is goodbye," I said, though I didn't mean it. "Not really." Her eyes flicked toward mine, the corners crinkling slightly. "No," she said with a quiet certainty. "I don't think it is." We exchanged a small wave before walking in opposite directions, but I didn't feel that hollow ache that usually comes with parting. Instead, there was a quiet thrill beneath my ribs, a pull that told me this was only the first step. As I walked away, I found myself already picturing the next time, the steam curling from our cups, the sound of her laugh mixing with the rain, the gold glint of her pendant catching the light. No, this wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet have a name for, but I knew, without a doubt, that I wanted to see where it would go. It's strange how certain moments refuse to fade. They don't dull with time. Instead, they grow sharper, richer, like an old photograph that somehow becomes more vivid the longer you keep it. Even now, whenever it rains, my mind drifts back to that evening at the Amber Leaf. I don't need much to trigger it, just the sound of water against glass, the scent of damp streets, or the soft hush that falls over the world when clouds hang low. It all comes rushing back, the warm glow of the calf lights against the gray outside, the silver streaks on the windows, the steady rhythm of rain like a song only we could hear. I remember her sitting across from me, a cup of tea cradled between her hands, her gold pendant catching the light every time she leaned forward. I remember the way she listened, how she gave each of my words her full attention, as if nothing beyond that table mattered. And I remember that smile, soft, unhurried, almost shy at first, but deepening the longer we talked. It wasn't the kind of smile you gave a stranger. It was the kind that stayed with you long after you'd gone home. The tea had cooled by the time we finally stood to leave, but it didn't matter. I couldn't tell you what the last thing we talked about was before we stepped outside into the post-rain air. What I do remember is the pause at the door, the shared glance, and the quiet understanding that this wasn't the end. She'd said, "I'd like that," when I suggested meeting again, and those three simple words had planted something in me. I've had countless cups of tea since then, in countless other places, but none have tasted quite the same. Maybe it wasn't the tea at all, maybe it was the way the air felt softer inside that calf, or how the rain made the world feel like it had slowed just for us. Maybe it was the comfort of knowing that an ordinary afternoon had turned into something extraordinary without either of us planning it. When I think about that evening now, I don't just remember the conversation or the details of her face. I remember the feeling, that quiet calm that settled over me, the sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the person I was supposed to be with. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't loud, it was a gentle certainty, like the way the rain falls, without asking permission, simply because it's meant to. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken my tea to go that day. If I hadn't asked to sit at her table, if I'd decided the timing wasn't right, I might never have known her voice, her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the things she loved. But I did ask, and she did say yes. Now, whenever the rain comes, I find myself smiling, not because of the weather itself, but because it carries that memory, an unshakable reminder that some of the most lasting things in life arrive without warning, in the quietest of moments. That rainy evening wasn't just about the weather. It was about connection, about two people who, for reasons neither could explain, recognized something in each other. And though the tea cooled and the calf eventually closed, the memory of her smile still warms me in a way no cup ever could. It's a warmth I carry with me, even now, long after the rain stopped.